What's happening, everyone? Welcome to the Fanatics View Hockey Show. My name is James Lynch. Look who we have back here, my good buddy Troy. You remember him a few weeks ago when we had him on to preview the Columbus Blue Jackets offseason. And today we're going to be talking all things Eastern Conference. So if you have any questions, post them in the chat. We're going to give our projections. And Troy and I, by the way, have not talked ahead of time, so I don't know which way he's going on some of these picks, but we're going to go through all the standings and kind of give how we think each team is going to fare in their respective divisions from the Eastern Conference. Next week, I will do the Western Conference. Although now that I think about it, I think the season will be starting. Actually, when the season starts, starts on the 4th. I think we're okay because I think preseason it will still be going on next week, so we can still do Western Conference predictions. But first and foremost, Troy, how you doing? Thanks so much for doing this, man.
I'm doing fantastic. Class got canceled today, so I'm really excited to be chatting some hockey with you right now.
Yeah, and I appreciate you coming on. And for those who don't know, haven't been following my MMA stuff, I have not had internet since Wednesday, so I'm at my mom's house right now in the kitchen. It looks like I'm in a bunker. I'm okay, guys. Don't worry, I haven't been kidnapped. It's all good. But yeah, excited to go through the Eastern Conference, which I would assume you got a little bit of a better idea than I do, just with Columbus being over there. I mean, I follow everything, but certainly interested to hear your take on this. My first, I think we'll work our way down and then we can kind of figure this out. I kind of made some notes here, but I think the team that's going to end up first overall, I think is going to be the Florida Panthers. They didn't lose a lot of key additions in the offseason. I'm just looking here at the team. Let me just have a look. I'm just thank you to The Athletic, by the way. They have a great article on like the key additions. So added to Florida this year, Jesper Voquist, AJ Greer, Thomas Nosek, Nate Schmidt, which I thought was a good pickup for them. Didn't really have to give up much to get him. And then Adam Boqvist. And then they had a bunch of departures, but we'll talk about why I don't think that's, anything to worry about here. They obviously lost Tarasenko, Kevin Stunlin, Nick Cousins, Ryan Lomberg, Brandon Martour, obviously a big one there, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and then goaltender Anthony Stolarz. What is your first pick? If it's not Florida, I would be curious to hear who you think is going to end up first overall. And then we're talking regular season, obviously.
Okay. I don't have Florida ranked first overall in the regular season. I obviously think they're going to have a lot more playoff success than their regular season points total would indicate. Mm-hmm. But for me, I'm entirely sold on the New Jersey Devils.
Okay.
This is a team that I know last year had a million injuries and you could make a ton of excuses. And everyone was all in on them last year too before Dougie Hamilton tore his pec, Siegenthaler broke his foot, Timo Meier didn't hit form until there was a coaching change. There were a lot of things that went wrong in New Jersey, and they absolutely did. And one thing that I love about them is they're one of the best teams at generating chances at 5-on-5, and they're fast as hell. Mm-hmm. They're awesome to watch, seeing them in person. They're skating circles around teams, cycling the puck. I love their veteran additions in Brendan Dillon, Brett Pesce, Stefan Noesen, all these type of penalty killer, workhorse type guys that could do the dirty work. I think that's what is going to push a team like the Devils over the hump, because we know they have all the skill in the world and all the talent, but in those other areas where it's gritty and they're looking for consistency, I think that's where they lacked in last year and the year before, where they only made it one round past the Rangers in the playoffs.
Okay. I like the pick. I'm also high on the Devils too. I don't have them in as high as you do. The one thing I will say, and we talked about this, I think on the last show, or maybe we didn't, I know I mentioned on the stream, is that they finally got a goaltender. Now, I don't think Jacob Markstrom is Martin Brodeur per se, but I think it gives them that stabilization in net that they haven't had, right? They've gone through Mackenzie Blackwood and so many other options. Corey Schneider was supposed to be the guy. Remember the big trade for Bo Horvat with the draft pick and all that. So, obviously it hasn't worked out for them in net. I think Markstrom will give them a couple good seasons. Remember, Markstrom's numbers last year were pretty good. He was dealing with some injuries, and he was also on a pretty bad Calgary Flames team. So I'm with you there. One thing I will say, and obviously we're going to go through the rest of the Eastern Conference, if you can get any bets on New Jersey to make the playoffs, I don't know what the odds are right now. I'm assuming they're not going to be like great odds. Probably be like minus 200, I would think. Place that. I really think this is almost a lock that New Jersey makes the playoffs. So I'm not going to go as high as first overall, but you look at some of the additions there. Thomas Tatar, I'm guessing they added that from, Tatar's there. Pesce, you mentioned. The only thing is they did lose John Marino. I thought that was a good piece for them. I know they had to sort of move around some salary. Any concerns there about Marino not being around? Because it seemed like that was a trade that New Jersey, frankly, stole from the Penguins, because I think it was Ty Smith who went the other way in that trade.
Yeah, like you said, I think he's a good player, but in terms of what they needed, I think they didn't need the profile of player that he is. I don't think they needed another two-way defenseman. I think they needed another defensive defenseman like Pesce and Dillon. And I think that's a big part of all these teams that I have ranked in the top right here, these probably top 4 or 5 teams that I have in the East. It's not so much the talent profile of each of these players. It's that every player has a defined role, whether that be penalty killing on the third or fourth line, and they know what they're doing. Whereas you see a lot of people year after year, they get the allure of, oh my God, look at these talented guys on the third line, blah, blah, blah. And then you have to have those guys kill penalties, and it doesn't work in the playoffs. And you're like, that's flashy in the regular season. You could just score and score. But I feel like those are the type of players that the Devils needed. And although it's perceived that John Marino is very talented, and I agree that he is, I don't think he was the exact fit that this team needed, especially with Nemitz and Luke Hughes, who are primarily offensive defensemen.
That's a good point. Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Okay, so you have Devils as number. Oh, and one last thing I'll mention: coaching. Sheldon Keefe, obviously at the helm. I like that move. I still don't know what Keefe is. Because we obviously was with Toronto for so long. Toronto had a very talented team. I mean, I think Toronto's just cursed. I mean, we'll talk about them a little bit later. Like, I don't know. They could have had, Scotty Bowman, prime Scotty Bowman behind the bench. I don't know if they still would have won those games. Like, I don't know what type of coach Keefe is going to be. But one thing I will say, I was not sold on Lindy Ruff. I thought that was a great move getting rid of him. I think Ruff's too old school. I'm sure we'll talk about Buffalo a little bit later. And then when they put in Travis Green, even though you expected a bit of a coach's bump, I think Green was an upgrade. It was too little too late. They didn't have the goaltending. They were dealing with some injuries. This year, though, New Jersey, bank it. I said it right here. They're going to make the playoffs. So you have them as in your number one spot. I have them at a little bit lower, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so I'm going Florida for my number one. You're going New Jersey. My number two, and correct me if I'm wrong. You can tell me, because I kind of get the divisions mixed up a little bit as far as like how the placement will go. But number two, as far as like overall points, I'm going to go the New York Rangers. I think this is still a very good team. They did lose to Florida. It was one of those things where, you could just see the tide turning in that series, but I still think this is a Rangers team. If we go have a quick look at some of the offseason moves that they didn't really lose or gain a whole lot. Whoops, sorry. So I'm trying to get my browser here. So if we go to the Rangers, one second, you'll see that they just added Riley Smith, and they did lose Roslovic, who was, I believe, a trade deadline acquisition. They lost Barclay Goudreau. That was more of a cap move. They didn't really lose much, in my opinion. What do you think of my Rangers at number two, and what's your number two?
Well, I still think the Rangers are going to make the playoffs. Don't get me wrong. But in general, they're not a team that I rank as highly as the rest of the consensus NHL fans, just because it rears its ugly head in the the postseason with the New York Rangers, is that they really struggle at generating chances at 5-on-5. And you see when they get on the power play, they convert nearly every time. And in the regular season, like when you're versing middle to lower level teams that are giving you penalties to win games, that's efficient. You guys can get points consistently that way. But honestly, I just ultimately think, like, unless something massively changes 5v5, like a Lafreniere breakout or a Riley Smith really adding like another level to the Kreider's advantage ad line at even strength, I could obviously still see them making the playoffs, but I don't think it's highly probable that they'll be a top 3 team in the division, personally.
Okay. So who do you got at number two?
This is the regular season. The Toronto Maple Leafs.
Okay.
I'm not saying they're going to go far in the playoffs, but year after year, they're always around this like top 4 or 5 position in the regular season. And I think there's no reason to believe that they shouldn't repeat that. And honestly, I think with John Tavares, not the actual C on his sweater, but moving down to the third line and like bringing more balance to the team in that way, I think it's probably going to be better for the team moving forward. And as well as I know, Chris Tanev is one of those guys that just silently does his job so well, effectively, consistently, and is a workhorse type guy. And that's a guy that brings consistency to a team that kind of struggled in certain portions of the season and going into the playoffs.
I did like the addition of Tanev. The big question with him is staying healthy. What's really weird is when he was in Vancouver, he had a history of, obviously injuries and stuff like that. He goes to Calgary, he's relatively healthy. He is a bit older, but his style of play, I mean, I think we talked about this before. I mean, I don't think that contract is going to last in terms of him playing the full, extension of it. But I do like the move there. OEL is a good depth piece. I've always said with OEL, he's a great player that doesn't need to be playing big minutes. He can thrive in that role. We'll see if, an injury or two goes down, he might have to be thrust into that. And I would agree with you as well that I think the goaltending seems a little bit more stable. Of course, again, the big thing there is in net is Woll going to be healthy? If he is, then we'll see how far he can go. He's still relatively young. And I like Anthony Stolarz as a pickup as well, in terms of some names. And you look at some of the departures. I mean, they're not going to miss Tyler Bertuzzi or Edmondson or Lyubushkin, or, Lyubushkin was a trade deadline pickup, or Samsonov. So I'm with you there. I guess just my concern is, I do wonder about this Mitch Marner thing. Is this going to be a bit of a distraction for the team? I think it would have been better. And granted, there's not teams lining up to take on that contract, I don't imagine, but they've got to figure something out with him. Are they keeping him? Are they going to trade him? I do wonder if that's going to be a distraction. I think Craig Berube, old school coach, I think he can handle the media. This guy's won a cup. I think that's going to be an interesting thing for him as well. I don't have them ranked as high. I'll talk about where I have them a little bit later. I just think that there will be stretches this year, I think, where they will struggle. And that's why I don't have them in that number, the number 2 spot or number 3 spot, just because I think they are going to run into a few issues this year, but we'll see. And the other issue too, is that, cap space, they don't have a ton of it. So it's like, let's say there's an injury or something happens. I don't think they're going to have a ton of flexibility, but we will see. I don't mind the pick. I would love Toronto to do better, just because it's, I know there's a lot of people in Canada that don't like Toronto. I kind of, listen, when Toronto's winning, it makes the whole media thing more interesting, like as far as, the coverage and all that. So I don't mind it at all. I like the pick, but I'm not brave enough to put them as high as you are on this spot. Okay, let's get to my number 3 pick. You can see it right here on the board. I'm going to go with the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, look, Carolina is pretty much the same team as last year. They did lose Jake Getzel, which again was a trade deadline acquisition for them. But if you look at, they got Jack Roslovic. I think that'll help with some offense. Sean Walker's an interesting one on the back end. Again, they lost Pesci, so you get Walker in there. And Shane Gottsbeer was at a pretty good contract as well. They did lose Getzel, Brady Skeckel, and Brett Pesci as well. They lose. I think they're pretty much the same team as last year. What's the story with Carolina? We all know this. They're a good regular season team. It just seems like they're not built to go on any sort of playoff run. I don't know why that is, but I think Carolina will still put up good numbers. You always have some questions in net with Freddie Anderson, and I don't even know who their backup is this year, because it was Antti Ranta, who I believe is going to be playing overseas this year. I still got Carolina ranked pretty high at my number 3 spot. Your thoughts on that pick, and I'll ask you after about your number 3.
So for me personally, I think Carolina, they're going to be a qualified playoff team, but I think they're going to be on the fringe of qualifying personally, because those 2 defenders are, like I said, the key thing for a good defender is you don't need to mention his name because he does his job quietly well. And Brady Shea and Brett Pesci are the quintessential versions of just 6'3", 6'4" monsters that block shots, make people's lives difficult, and just create tons of pressure and actually have sneaky fast skating ability. My number 3, when I was breaking down these teams, I can't even believe I had them ranked here, but I'm going for regular season. I got to go for the Boston Bruins. And
okay,
I think the big thing with that is, at least right now, it's slated that Zadorov and Charlie McAvoy are going to be the top line at even strength. And I just think that's going to be a destroyer top line. And the second line is similar. It's Hampus Lindholm and Brandon Carlo, but the big guys on the right side instead of the left side on the second line. And I think the addition of Elias Lindholm, who is clearly being recruited by David Pastrnak to get on this team, I think he's going to add the center depth that they desperately needed. And we've seen time and time again, similarly to the Carolina Hurricanes and the Islanders, consistency, culture, and holding players accountable. Even if your roster isn't glorious with talent, if your players know your roles, you get in. And I think we've seen year after year, it's a little bit foolish to write the Bruins off. And I think them, with as much success as they had last year with a very weak center group, I think Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov will just bring the extra tenacity and veteran-type presence that fits this culture, I believe.
I'm curious to see, how this unfolds. The other thing we got to keep an eye on for this is Jeremy Swayman. Everything I'm reading right now, they're not close on an extension. I actually heard a Boston guy the other day being like, do you trade him? Do you get something for him? I don't know. I mean, obviously they have a backup, but you hope that they can come to some sort of terms, because your goaltending, that's a big question mark going into the season. The Bruins have been blessed over the last decade of always having good goaltending, starting, from Tim Thomas to Tuukka Rask to, Swayman now, Linus Ullmark, where they're able to trade him just because they have two really good goalies. I think that's going to be dependent a lot as well. You mentioned Brandon Carlo. There's been some health issues there. You hope that, he can stay healthy and see what happens. Again, you're saying that's the second pairing. That makes sense. And listen, I love Zadorov. I think the fans are going to love him. I'm actually I'm bummed out he left Vancouver, and I understand it. The guy deserves to get paid for what he did in the playoffs last year for Vancouver. But there were points last year that Rick Tocchet was really frustrated with him. And there was some talk of, it not going well for him. And we'll see if he can replicate that, because I think there were points, and even in Calgary, where you did see some dips. Now, I think Boston's a good environment for him. I think he will thrive. I've told you this before, and I'm sticking to my guns here. I think Lindholm's going to be the one that's the big question mark. There was some talk of some injuries, or, he didn't really even get to catch his breath. Because if you remember, he had the All-Star game, then he got traded, then he came right to Vancouver. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe there was rumors we were hearing an injury. But let's also not forget, there were rumors out there that I think were pretty credible. They were actually looking to flip Lindholm at the deadline. It wasn't working out in Vancouver. He had a lot of good people to play with. I mean, it's not like there's any shortage of, talent with JT Miller, Elias Pettersson, and all that. I just question if he's that number one guy. I personally don't think we've seen him reach that level that he had a few seasons ago with Calgary when Johnny Gaudreau was there. So we'll see if he's able to capture that with Boston. But Lindholm, to me, is a big question mark. I don't think he's a first-line center. And I think that, that might be something that they're going to regret a bit as the season goes on. But we'll see what happens. Again, if Lindholm plays well, I'm with you as far as the placement of Boston. But I just I have some questions as someone who saw him up close in the regular season with the Canucks. It was almost he didn't live up to expectations. And granted, that was a shorter sample size, but I do have some questions about that as well. And the Swayman thing too. So we'll see. Don't mind it. But like I said, I think there's some, stuff to be figured out there. Okay. So we're on number 4 now, if my math's correct. Hopefully we're still going here. So my number 4. So again, just to recap, I went Florida, New York, Carolina. After that, I'm going Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, I think Getzel is an upgrade over Steven Stamkos. I know Stamkos had that nice goal the other night. He certainly fit in well with Nashville. And actually, let me just quickly look at some other additions they got in the offseason, because that's always good to just refresh my memory. So whoops, not the Anaheim Ducks. I'm looking for Lightning. Here we go. So they got Getzel, Cam Atkinson, which is, more of like a veteran presence there. Ryan McDonough, I think getting him back will be good. McDonough played well for Nashville in the playoffs last year. And, look at some key additions. Duclair, that was a deadline pickup. Stamkos, they'll miss as far as leadership. By the way, they announced Victor Hedman's going to be the captain for Tampa Bay. I like that move. They lost Tanner Jeannot. Sergachev, that will be one they do miss. I mean, I don't think McDonough replaces him. I did forget about that. And then Matt Dumba, again, another acquisition at the deadline there. I just think Getzel, he's a slam dunk pick. That's who I wanted in Vancouver. They paid a lot to get him, but I mean, the data shows, if you look at his stats, if he's legit. I mean, he was legit with Carolina. He was legit with Pittsburgh. Granted, he had a lot of good players to play with, but I think that having him does make them a better offensive group. I agree, though. I know what you're about to say about Sergachev leaving. That is a big hole to fill. But I still think, Vasilevsky's still playing at a good level. I think Tampa's going to take a step forward. I don't see them winning the cup or making any noise in the playoffs, but Tampa Bay's going to be there. Your thoughts on that pick?
Hopefully this phone stops ringing.
Oh, no worries. No worries. It's all good. Don't worry about it.
Okay, it finally stopped.
Yeah, no worries. It's all good. We're doing this live. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, I think Tampa's still talented enough to make the playoffs for sure. I like the addition of Cam Atkinson on a very cheap contract.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I don't have them ranked as high, although I still think they'll make the playoffs because of the talent profile, is the look on the power play is going to be entirely different because Jake Gensel's a left-handed shot as opposed to a right-handed shot. And although he did play the left-handed side on the power play in Pittsburgh, I think that's going to be a slight adjustment just based off of how everything works, because Braden Point and the bumper and Nikita Kucherov, the left-handed shot on the right side, it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to. That's why I have them a little bit lower, although they're still making the playoffs. My number 4 for me, I have the Florida Panthers here.
Okay.
I think they're going to go down one spot from where they finished last year. I obviously think that their playoff success is going to be better than where their points total indicates. But I think this is another case of where these players fit into their roles perfectly, especially on defense. Brendan Montour is gone. At even strength, Gustav Forsling and Aaron Ekblad are fantastic. They're a great shutdown pair. And on the power play, where OEL played because Brandon Montour didn't replicate the same success he had 2 years ago is Adam Boquist, who I'm extremely familiar with as a Columbus Blue Jackets fan. And I've always questioned Adam Boquist's ability to defend, but I've never questioned his ability to produce on the second unit of the power play. And I think Adam Boquist, as a right-handed shot and as young as he is, former first-round draft pick, most likely being slotted onto the top power play unit, I think he could have a sneaky, really good season. I know this isn't a fantasy hockey show, but I think Adam Boquist could have real boom or bust value in terms of fantasy hockey because what the contract indicates, and I think Paul Maurice made this very clear in the playoffs in these interviews, Gustav Forsling is the best at what he does. He knows he's an amazing even strength player. He does not utter the words power play quarterback, XYZ gifted offensive player. Yes, he scores goals, he chips in, he gets assists, but when Brandon Montour was hurt, he didn't even get a really long look at the first power play. OEL got it very quick. So, and obviously when he signed that contract for, what was it, around 6 mil, maybe 5.8 or something like that, I think everyone, when they saw that, they were like, oh my God, how did they pull that off? Because I think in the negotiations, it was very firm that it was like, we do not view you as a power play one guy. We will not pay you like that. And I think he agrees. And I think that's why Boquist slotted in. And I think another player you're familiar with, Nate Schmidt, he's a great locker room guy, great glue guy, and I think he'll fit right in with these guys here.
I agree. Although he hated Vancouver, which was weird. I mean, they had a terrible team that year. You remember he was basically supposed to be Tanev's replacement. We got him from Vegas when Vegas was sort of in cap trouble. I think we traded like a 5th round pick, and he lasted like a season. He's like, I'm out of here. And you know how bad it is that he wanted to go to Winnipeg of all places, which is way worse weather. So I got to factor that in. But yeah, I've heard the same thing about Nate Schmidt, that he is a good locker room guy, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that sort of all pans out. Okay, my 5th pick, if we're keeping track here, is going to be the Bruins. Yeah, I mean, we sort of went into depth about the Bruins, so I have them in number 5. Who's your number 5?
Yeah, so this is where my rankings from here on out, the top few, I feel like consensus-wise, they're pretty similar to what people think, but maybe just in a slightly different order. This is where stuff's going to get a little crazy.
That's why you're here, man. I love it. Let's hear it.
I firmly believe there's going to be a lot of turnover in this division.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not in terms of qualifying teams, but I think the teams in the murky middle might hit rock bottom. And I think maybe 1 or 2 of these teams in the middle are going to break through and make the playoffs. And my number 5 here, I've got the Buffalo Sabres.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I know that sounds a little crazy, but this is generally a team that at 5v5, they're about bang on average. And the year before, they were dynamite. So I think this is a team also that struggled enormously with goaltending after the departure of Linus Ullmark a few years ago, because sadly enough, he's what they needed the whole time. They just got rid of him because they didn't project this retool to be so quick, or they would have kept him, because his underlying stats, and we all know from fantasy that Linus Ullmark, when he was on the Buffalo Sabres, was absolutely fantastic. And that's why he was a home run deal for when the Bruins got him. And I ultimately just think with the talent profile of this team and these young guys, that we always say this, I know this is a Blue Jackets fan, you can't get excited too early about these prospects. And the Buffalo Sabres guys, they're in like the 3, 4, 5 years hanging around the league point, and this is where they kind of pop off. And this is where they kind of shake stuff up. And you'll see that with the current themes of these teams that I have moving forward. So I have the Buffalo Sabres making it at number 5 here, making a big splash in the Atlantic Division.
Okay. I definitely like that pick. That's this is why we're here. I love the wild card stuff. And I guess I'm not that high on Lindy Ruff as a coach. Like, I do wonder, like, I think what's the best way I can put it? I think he's too old school, if that makes sense. Like, I think like his structure, his methods. I mean, this is a guy he coached Buffalo back when I was in high school. Like, that's how long ago it's been that he's been back there. I think it's cool to bring him back as a head coach, though. I don't know. Buffalo's been one of the weirdest franchises because it's just been a revolving door of coaches, general managers. Who's the guy they brought a couple seasons ago? Ralph Kruger, the guy who was coaching a soccer team, and they brought him in, and I remember Ralph when he coached Edmonton, or was a part of the Oilers as well. I feel bad for the players, because it's like, I complain as a Canucks fan how long it had been since we had made the playoffs. Buffalo's even worse, and they've been doing a proper rebuild, and it still hasn't worked out. So I wish the Sabres to do well. I love the Sabres team back in the 90s when you had like Daniel Briere, Miroslav Satan, you had Hasek, Ryan Miller was there too. Like, it was a fun, cool team with the old Buffalo logo. I love that. And the old red and black colors. But they've struggled. I would love your pick to be right, but like I said, I've got some questions with goaltending. I do forget how young Devin Levi is. I think he's still 22 or something. They actually had him in an Athletic articles talking about like, promising up and coming goaltenders. And I did forget how young he was, but yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of things that have to go right, but I do like some of the additions. We're looking at them here. Ryan McLeod, good veteran guy. Jason Zucker, someone I saw firsthand in the playoffs last year with Nashville. And Sam Lafferty's a speedy guy, although he, found himself as a healthy scratch in Vancouver as well last year. I don't think they're going to miss Jeff Skinner that much. He did play better as his contract wore on, but I mean, you're getting more use out of that cap space than you are keeping him around. And same with those other two guys that they departed as well. But I like the pick. We'll definitely keep that in mind as we're looking through the season. Okay, so my number 6 is going to be the New Jersey Devils. I'm with you. I'm fully on the New Jersey Devils bandwagon. And the other thing we got to remember last year too, Jack Hughes. I always get the brothers mixed up. Jack and Luke. Luke's the defenseman. Jack's the forward. When Jack's healthy, and again, we're getting another year of Jack Hughes, so he's going to be even better, I think, than the year before. This is going to be one of the most exciting players in the NHL this season. I think he's going to start, like, even last year you saw glimpses of it where you're like, this is a guy that like is becoming a superstar in the league. I think this year is going to be his year. They've got everything that's working well. They got the new coach that I think is, going to be a good fit. They got the goaltending, the defense, like you mentioned, talked about some of the things being stronger there. He is going to be making a huge stride this year. And I got to imagine too, seeing his brother last year go on quite the playoff run with Vancouver, that's got to be motivating as well, knowing what's capable, in terms of, younger players taking that step forward like Vancouver did last year. I think they're going to do well. I would also put New Jersey higher too. Like, I don't know what the ceiling is here, but I'm very excited to see what they can do this season. And I think they have all the additions, like we mentioned there, in terms of what they can do. So who's your number? Number 6. Who's number 6 for you?
So for me at number 6, I've got the New York Rangers personally. Like I said, I'm not thrilled with this team's ability at 5-on-5. Yes, that could change. The addition of Riley Smith going onto that line with Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad could change a lot. We saw the second half of the season, the emergence of Alexis Lafreniere. If he could replicate that success for the whole entire season, that's going to be enormous, and he might force his way onto the first power play. And this is a player that I absolutely love. Philip Hedl, if this guy could stay healthy, I know he got a knee-on-knee collision with Scott Mayfield, and then Scott
it didn't look good last night.
Absolutely destroyed Ryan Lindgren. But if Philip Hedl could stay healthy, this is a player that at 5-on-5 is absolutely dynamite at generating chances. And this guy, he never played the first power play, and he was consistently getting 2.5 to 3 shots a game at even strength, barely playing 15 minutes a night. And I think we all know players like Keandre Miller and Ryan Lindgren are another set of defensemen that just block shots, do their job quietly. But the one thing that concerns me is this Jacob Trouba chaos and nonsense behind the scenes, and how I've heard things on numerous podcasts. It seems that they're just on mutual terms. Like, after this year, it's over. Like the outside of hockey thing with his wife and the doctor, whatnot. After this season, that's over. And then it looks like he's going to be moved. So I don't know how that's going to affect the team moving forward. But ultimately, with the rest of the East and the talent profile of this team, I just can't see them missing the playoffs. But like I said, with how average they are at 5-on-5, they finished the best team in the NHL last year in the regular season. I just don't think that's going to happen again.
Okay. I'm with you there. I can definitely see some of the points. I completely forgot about the Trouba thing, by the way. This is why we have you here. These are little tidbits that we need to know. Okay. Number 7 for me is going to be Toronto. I know it's weird that they would like move down a little bit after not losing much there, but I just think a lot of these teams that are in the East are better. That's really what it comes down to. Like, I don't think the Leafs did that much. Like, I love Chris Tanev. I'm very clear about that. I think he's great. I think it's going to be good. Do I think he's a difference maker compared to some of the other teams that got their own acquisitions? No, I don't. Again, I know a team like New York didn't really make a lot of noise either, but New York also, was close to making the Stanley Cup final last year. I think they're a much, and not to mention the goaltending. The thing with the Leafs that I always still wonder about, like, again, I talked about Woll being healthy. I talked about, getting Solarts, I think there's just a big question mark in net. Like, a lot of these teams that we've talked about, they all pretty much have solid goaltending. You know how big I am on that. Like, that's a big factor for the Leafs as well. I think their defense is better. I think they've made some good moves. And then, up front, obviously they've still got the firepower. They're going to be one of the highest scoring teams in the league. I do wonder if there could be some more offense there. And I don't know if they really got like any sort of difference makers from that end either. They did get Max Pacioretty. That's one I didn't list on the thing there. Looks like he's going to end up getting a contract. And I think that could actually be, by the way, feel free to throw out fantasy hockey stuff because you and I are actually going to be drafting tomorrow with a group of my friends. Excited for that draft, by the way. But that's a guy I'll look at because I think, he's older and he's not the Pacioretty that we've seen in Vegas, but he was also, hindered by injuries. And when he was playing, he actually played pretty well. So I think he could be a guy that could, definitely produce some things. But again, I wouldn't consider that a difference maker. So really what this pick comes down to, like I said, is I think there's all these teams that have done things in the offseason that have got better, or they're just teams that were ranked higher. And I just don't think the Leafs have done enough for me to put them, back in that number 5 spot. Like I think Tampa Bay is better than them. I think New Jersey, like I just mentioned there, I think, their acquisitions are good. So I have Toronto at the number 7 spot. Who do you have at number 7?
For me right here, I've got the Tampa Bay Lightning, 1 spot lower than they did last year. Like I said before, I think the Jake Gensel addition is going to be great at even strength, but on the power play, it's going to be a different look, taking a little bit of adjusting. Back on the defensive end, the addition of JJ Moser he's not going to replace Mikhail Sergachev, but he's going to be playing in the same position that he was. I think that's obviously a clear downgrade. And I think obviously, like I said, with the common theme of these teams, the talent profile is too good for some of these teams to miss, and especially if someone of Nikita Kucherov's level, who had the most points in the NHL last year and didn't win the MVP.
Yeah.
So, like I said, there's nothing I hate about this team, but there's not much that I'm going crazy about over this team. And I think fantasy hockey-wise, it's always the usual suspects. It's Braden Point, it's Nikita Kucherov, Jake Gensel, and obviously Victor Hedman's on that power play, but we don't know who's going to be in that 5th and final spot. And years past, it's always rotated. It could be Nick Paul. It could be Brendan Hagel. It could be Cam Atkinson. No one really knows who the net front guy is going to be. So we'll see how that changes over the season. And that's someone that on your waiver wire, I would be keeping an eye out on, because most likely Brendan Hagel will be drafted, but Cam Atkinson, if he sneaks his way onto power play 1, that's a must add instantaneously.
All right. My number 8 pick. This might surprise some people, but I have a theory on this, and I'm going to implement that theory in a second. I'm going to stick with the team we're looking at right here. I think the Capitals are going to make the playoffs again. Now, look, I know the points. If you look at the points last year and you look at the goals for and against, like it was minus 37 goal differential, and they still made the playoffs. And it was like, how did that even happen? Because everyone just assumed Pittsburgh was going to make it, and they didn't. The X factor for me here is Pierre-Luc Dubois. Now, he's on his 3rd team. It was Winnipeg, Columbus. Now he's with Washington. I've heard a lot of good things just around the league about Spencer Carberry as far as a coach. I know a lot of people even felt like he should have been a consideration for the Jack Adams last year just because of some of the things that he's done with his players. You're with Ovi. I don't think you can pull any of the stuff he was pulling in Columbus when you got a guy like Ovi there. He's well-respected in the league. And then the other thing they got was Jacob Chychrun for nothing. And Jacob Chychrun's he's a good defenseman. I know, again, didn't make a lot of noise in Ottawa, but I think in Washington, I think that's a little bit of a better fit now. Like I always talk about on here, and I mentioned earlier on this show, the goaltending's still a big question mark. But I think they have enough offense that they can still get it done and possibly, make their way into the playoffs. And also, Ovi's chasing that record as well. You got to imagine the team's going to rally around that. So again, I know a bit of a wild card, as far as Washington getting in there. But I do think right now, again, if Dubois can have a bounce back season and look like we've seen him in years past, I do think that could be an X factor for them getting into the playoffs. So that's my number 8 pick. Your thoughts on that? And then I want to hear your number 8 pick.
Well, the Washington Capitals, I only have them 1 spot lower than you. So I have almost the same exact thoughts about that team, but I just don't have them making the playoffs. This is where I have Carolina being the last team to make the playoffs for me personally. And I think that just simply comes down to the loss of Brady Shea and Brett Pesce, because those are just consistent defenders. I know they got Shane Gostisbehere and Sean Walker, and they're expecting a big improvement from Jalen Chatfield, because that's a guy that they've basically started as a 7th defenseman, came up from the AHL. He really worked his way into the league and didn't really have a perceived chance to make it into the NHL. And I think the reason why I have them dropping off so much is strictly defensively. I think offensively, they might have to play a different brand of hockey. I think a motivated Marty Necas just wants to get his 2 years over with and get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
Seth Jarvis just got his bag. Jack Roslovic, I'm familiar with him as a Columbus Blue Jacket. He's a confidence guy. He's a streaky guy. He's going to have spurts where he's amazing. There's going to be games where he looks like he's not doing much, but ultimately he has the versatility to play wing and center. And respectfully, I love the guy, but how old is Brent Burns? Is he like 40, 38,
Yeah.
39? Like this is I know he takes care of his body and eats liver and everything, but I don't know how
Looks
much
like the
longer
Liver
this
King too
guy
with
can
that
be
beard.
playing at the
Yeah.
top level, top minutes. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I can definitely see it. Again, the reason I have them a little bit higher is I think, Freddie Anderson's on point. I think, yeah, the defense will suffer a little bit. But I mean, this is still a very good regular season team. One of the things that annoys me a lot about the NHL industry is how much everyone talks about how great Carolina is. Kind of not forgetting, but like neglecting that, they haven't really gone on like a deep playoff run. Like, I guess they did a couple seasons ago, but everyone just talks about how great, like, Tulski is and they're a genius and stuff. And it's like, I look at a team that, went all in on, what's his name, Getzel, and didn't even get anything out of it. So it's like, I feel like they don't get criticized enough in the media. And I don't mind seeing them in this spot here just because, like, I like Carolina. I just think the media hypes them up too much. So that's something that I'm not a fan of. Okay, so my number 9 pick, so this would be missing the playoffs, is another team that I think gets overhyped a lot, and that's the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, look, the Penguins were very close to making the playoffs last year. If we go look at some of their additions in the offseason, it hasn't been much. Anthony Beauvillier is a name that I know because he played for the Canucks. Kevin Hayes, veteran. And I mean, I'm not seeing a whole lot here. They lose Riley Smith, Jeff Carter retired, Pierre Oliver Joseph. I mean, and then you got the big question mark in net, right? And listen, I love Tristan Jarry. I've told this story before. His parents have a grocery store about a town over from where I live. I would love to see him do well. I got some questions about that contract and how he's going to look and stuff. With that, you still got Sidney Crosby with the new contract. You still got Malkin. When those guys are healthy, they are certainly an interesting team. I think just like this past season, I think they'll get close, but ultimately they will.
Oh, I think the internet went out.
Sorry, I keep doing that same thing where I'm hitting the back button on the article, but I hit it on the wrong tab. This is why it sucks not having a second screen here. So apologies for that. But yeah, I was basically just saying that they're a team that I think can look good, but I don't think it's going to be good enough for them to make the playoffs. So I got the Penguins just on the outside looking in my number 9 spot.
Yeah, so it's going to be a while till we start discussing the Pittsburgh Penguins on my end, but we'll save that for later in the show.
Like I said, the two teams that I think get overhyped the most by the media, just from the stuff I read, is Carolina and Pittsburgh. So I'm more than happy to see them lower on this list.
I wholeheartedly agree. And this next spot that I have, just the first team to just miss the playoffs, like I said, the Washington Capitals.
Mm-hmm.
I think last year, I mean, they had the worst goal differential in the past 32 years to qualify for the playoffs or something like that. So, and I think most of that is due to not the Hurricanes. The Detroit Red Wings lost 7 games in a row down the stretch at the end of the season to not make the playoffs when it was basically in the bag. The Penguins did a similar thing, right? And that means just lower caliber teams made the playoffs, like the Islanders and the Capitals, respectfully. So I think their playoff appearances last year were more of a catastrophic collapse of the Red Wings and others, as opposed to them like being as good as they were. But I'm with you. I'm a huge Jacob Chikrin truther. He's a fantasy hockey legend. If you're in Bangers leagues, shoots like crazy, hits, blocks. He's everything you want to be in. You never know. Washington could pivot to a 2 defenseman on the power play 1 over there, and his value could go through the roof, because clearly we even saw in Ottawa when he wasn't on power play 1, he was fantasy relevant as anything. And like you said, Pierre-Luc Dubois, he's the X factor. If he can really bring some consistency to his game with playing on the top line and top power play that he wasn't gifted in LA, this could be a 70, 80 point player and help Ovechkin towards his record-breaking season.
Yeah, totally with you there. Okay, my next pick, I think this one's kind of obvious. I'm going to go with the New York Islanders. It's goaltending, right? Like, I think you still got a solid, netminder that is capable. Although I think, is it him? No, I always forget if it's him. No, it's Shesterkin who has the new contract. Although I think he's getting close too. I'll have to look that up in a second. But
Shesterkin has a contract coming. He's the next upcoming big free agent for the Rangers, and Sorokin just got a contract for the Islanders.
Yeah. So, so okay, yeah, that makes sense. And by the way, I'm hearing 12 million for Shesterkin. It's like, for Sorokin, or no, Shesterkin. Shesterkin's the Rangers, Sorokin's the Islanders. I always get they're both Russian, so it's kind of hard to figure that out. But yeah, I think again, the Islanders did make the playoffs last year. The thing with them is, and we talked about this before, and I talked about that article a few weeks ago in The Athletic of the teams that are kind of stuck in the middle. They're a prime example. They have no cap space. They got one acquisition in the offseason, which was Anthony Duclair, which I think will help, but not a difference maker. Kind of like I was saying with the Leafs, right? Like they didn't get anyone, but they can't because they don't have the cap space to do so. I do expect guys like Dobson to, get better as the season goes on. You got Barzell, you got Bo Horvat. They have the goaltending. I think they'll be okay in the season, but I just think it's going to be hard for them to make the playoffs when you look at some of the other teams that have sort of thrived there. So I've got the Islanders at my number 10 spot here. Looking at the standings, who's your number 10?
Yeah, so I have them in the same exact spot as you. And
there we go. We agree. Finally, there you go.
I think that's the actual first one that we have.
I know. We have. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have a similar perception of the Islanders. They're like the definition of the murky middle. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Everyone you talk to, even Islanders fans, are like, I think we can make the playoffs this year, but I don't know how much more. And listen, I live on Long Island. I've lived on Long Island my whole life. I have a good understanding of this metropolitan division in general. And all these Islanders fans are talking about is Maxim Siplikov. I saw the first game. I saw some clips from practice. This guy's a beast. Mm-hmm. He's built like a brick shithouse. He's not afraid to hit people. He's a net front guy. He's going to be the winger that Brock Nelson always needed instead of playing with Pierre Engvall and Kyle Palmieri. I always made fun of my Islanders friends. I still do. I say, it's incredible that Brock Nelson puts up 30-plus goals every year with wingers that are like the equivalent of third liners. Like, this guy is fantastic. And they're like, could you imagine if he had someone to crash the net and do damage? This might be the guy. And he's coming off a great season in the KHL and has a good reputation. And I think he's like 25 years old. So it's not like he's a really young guy. Like, this guy's been playing pro in Russia with good deployment for a while. And I know I might be tipping my cap a little bit here for when the Islanders go in our draft tomorrow, but we saw when Patrick Roy came to this team, the average time on ice of his top players increased about 2.5 minutes. So I think that we've seen Duclair, Horvat, and Barzal as the top line. I think, although I don't think very highly of the Islanders, just strictly due to deployment, these are players that massively interest me in fantasy hockey. And Brock Nelson's the other guy, and Noah Dobson that slot in on that top power play unit. And I think for fantasy, this is a team that I never really used to lean on because they evened out the lines and spread everything out. Now with Patrick Roy, all I want is Islanders top power play in fantasy. But no, I don't think it's going to be enough to bring them into the playoffs.
Okay, let's get to we're on 11, I believe, right? If I'm keeping track. It's, kind of doing this.
Yep,
if I had a spreadsheet, it would be so much easier. I'm going with the Buffalo Sabres. And, a lot of those points you brought up earlier, I agree with. This too is another, I think they'll take a step forward. You know what Buffalo reminds me of right now is the New Jersey Devils from 2 seasons ago, where they did make some strides. You saw that glimpse of hey, these this sort of rebuild that we're doing is kind of going better. Like I said, I think with, Skinner out and them allocating that, salary to other people, I think that's a good move. I think Devin Levi will look better. They got to figure out the goaltending too, because obviously they're like Detroit. They have 5 goaltenders under contract or something right now. But like I said, I'm not sold on Lindy Ruff as a coach, but I think they will. I think this will be a better season for them. I think they will, inch a little bit closer. Like I said, I guess I've got them 1 spot or 2 spots up. But yeah, I'm going with the Sabres here. I think they will look better, but I think there's still going to be some more work to do.
Yeah. So this is where my rankings are really going to get crazy.
Good. Let's hear
the order of these next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are not going to even anticipate the order that this is going to go. So here we go. Number 11, missing the playoffs and basically being a seller at the deadline. This is the class we're in right now where I think these teams are going to be the lowest of the 80 points to high 70s. This is the tier we're in right now. And I'm going Columbus Blue Jackets.
Okay. Yeah. I was thinking of putting them higher, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
I think through preseason, the one player that sneakily impressed me a little bit more than I massively anticipated is Jordan Harris from the Montreal Canadiens that we got. Like I said, I love defensemen that are poised, composed, do their work, don't make a lot of turnovers. I mean, this guy in preseason just wasn't shaken by anything. And I think last year, structure and consistency is what they lacked, and his addition on the back end is going to help a ton. David Jiricek, he's going to most likely be on this team this year, being quarterbacking the second power play unit. And He could be playing on the top pair with Zach Werenski. He could be on the second pair with Provorov. Who knows? But this is a 6'3" dynamite player that I've always thought the world of. Their top line right now, I absolutely love it. Boone Jenner back on the wing, Sean Monahan in the middle, and Kirill Marchenko. Second line, JVR, Adam Fantilli, and Yegor Chinikov. Third line, Dmitry Voronkov, Sillinger, Kent Johnson. And then our fourth line is just our classic identity line, Justin Danforth, Sean Crowley, Matthew Olivier. And I think with all the horrible things that have happened to this organization, like these players have been in and around Columbus, in camp, skating, going to the funeral, around each other way more, training harder, an extra sense of motivation. We have Dean Evison, who actually has run an NHL training camp. We weren't thrust into a horrible situation where we got a new coach 2 days before the season, right?
Mhm.
And I think that sentiment was echoed in a lot of these players' interviews, that they said, wow, I can't believe how early we got to systems and doing the neutral zone and this and this and this early in camp. And Dean Evison in his interviews is saying, yeah, it's all important. We're on the same page. So once we're all on the same page, then we could do conditioning, toughness, battle, X, Y, Z, because we need to understand the patterns that we're going in. And I think it's not a coincidence that his winning percentage is over 600, Dean Evison as a head coach. So as you know as well as I know, Rick Tocchet massively improved the Vancouver Canucks. I don't think that Dean Evison is going to massively improve the Columbus Blue Jackets per se, but from finishing in the last place of the division to where this is now, where I'm predicting them as the 11th spot, I think that's a solid improvement. And I'm sticking with this. I think they're going to get somewhere in between 83 and 77 points, honestly, but not make the playoffs.
My 12th pick here is going to be the Detroit Red Wings. And I know, I don't know what they're doing in Detroit. I don't know what the plan is. I don't know why they have, again, like 5 goalies they're trying to figure out. Some of the moves they've made are very questionable, but I also can't ignore the fact that, they did get 91 points last year and they were close to, they tied the Capitals. They didn't get in just based off point percentage. So that's how they ended up being on the outside looking in. So I think they'll still be similar to what they were last year. I think the teams we already mentioned didn't get that much better in the offseason. And mind you, Detroit didn't either, but I think Detroit is still better than these teams. I can't put Detroit too low because, again, there's some potential there. You look at Seider and Raymond and all these guys that got new contracts. You have to imagine they're going to be better this year. And, again, like I think there's definitely some question marks, but I think out of all the teams we're going to be talking about here, I do think Detroit has a little bit more of a punch there than some of the other teams. And again, Columbus, I do think they will outperform what people think just because, look at Vegas with the whole shooting. Like, I think there is something to like a team rallying together and playing for something. And I think there is something to that. So I'll mention Columbus a little bit later on here, but I got to put the Red Wings at 12. I don't think they're going to fall that much, but I still think some of the teams I mentioned have improved a bit more. So who's your number 12?
So my number 12, I've got the Penguins. I'm not really thrilled with the size on their back end because Chris Letang, Matt Grzelcyk, and Erik Karlsson, I don't think any of them are 6 feet or over. I'm not sure if any of them are even 6 feet tall. They may say they are, but I doubt it, So primarily defensively, I think that's the biggest issue with this team. They're expecting a huge role boost from Anthony Beauvillier. I think in terms of fantasy hockey, always reliable. Brian Rust is always going to be playing with Sidney Crosby, especially with the departure of Jake Gensel. This guy's going to be shooting like an absolute lunatic. And a player that I really like that I was always been upset that he never got top line roles consistently. He only got it when there was injuries. But Rickard Rakell, I think he's a fantastic player. When he was with the Ducks, he was fantastic. He was a guy that I went to for the shots on goal prop 2.5 every night for that horrible team. And he just did it. And you saw in the glimpses that he played on Power Play 1 when Gensel was hurt or Rust was hurt, that he can and is 100% capable of playing on a top line and a top power play unit. So I think this is a guy that has sneaky value in fantasy hockey. And I'm curious to see if he can really level up and if hopefully they give him some top line deployment that he deserves. But ultimately, I just think Pittsburgh's too inconsistent on the back end and they just can't make the playoffs with this group of players. And I don't think Kyle Dubas is a good general manager, respectively.
I don't either. I mean, oh man, what I point to, and I think we might have talked about this on the last show that you were on. I mean, they had that cap space last summer, or it was 2 summers ago. And when Dubas came in, so yeah, not this past summer before. And, they had a bunch of options and Dubas, wanted to make the big trade. So he gets Erik Karlsson. Now, again, Carlson's a good defenseman. I don't think he's worth what he's getting. I just wonder, if you had that extra cap space, you could have brought Getzel back. You didn't have to trade him. And, again, what was it, Graves? There was a couple other moves they made that just haven't really panned out the way you want. Like, I think like they could have been in a great position cap wise, and instead they're at the cap and not a better team. And I'm with you there. Like, I don't mind this pick at all where you have them, because I'm also not a believer in Pittsburgh like a lot of the media are. Like, we've already sort of talked on here as well. Okay, what are we at? 13 now, I think. That's where we're headed. I think we just did 12. I'm going to go with the Ottawa Senators. Yes, they got absolutely nothing in return for Jacob Chikrin. They got the new arena deal, which is good. They've got, I think, stable ownership, which is something they haven't. Like, I had Andrew Stein on here, a good friend of mine who writes for the Hockey News. And I mean, years and years just talking about Melnick and, them just being cheap, and Pierre Dorian with some of the moves they were making. And I feel like now they have stability, even with coaching. They got Travis Green, they got Mike Yeo leaving the Canucks and coaching with Travis Green, two guys that have actually taken a lot from Rick Tocchet. Mike Yeo was Rick Tockett's assistant last year. Travis Green was with Rick Tocchet in Arizona, I don't know. Actually, I can't remember if he was a coach with Arizona, but I know that they're like good friends. So, again, I think there's going to be a bit more structure. I mean, they had Jacques Martin as the coach last year. Again, a guy who was coach when I was in high school. So a little bit different there as far as what Ottawa has. But the big thing for me is the goaltending with Linus Ullmark. They finally have, I think, a good goaltender. Now, here's the thing. One of the things that Ullmark relied on heavily in Boston was having good defensemen that could help him when it came to, the shots that would come on net. Ottawa doesn't really have that. So I don't think you're going to see the same Ullmark in Boston as you are in Ottawa, but I certainly think that Ullmark will be an upgrade over some of the names they've had over the last couple of years in terms of, it being a bit of a goalie graveyard, dating back to like Andrew Hammond and some of the other names they've had in the crease over the years. So, and again, you got guys like, Stützle. They have some young talent on this team that, again, I think will make step forwards this year. I still don't think they're a playoff team, but I think Ottawa will do better than last season. And that's why I've got them in my number 12 spot or 13 spot, whatever we just said. You're on mute. It's all good. Don't worry about it. I know that
my phone was ringing before.
Yeah, don't worry
I had to stop it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay,
I like
thank you for
versatility.
catching me. But right here, I've got the Detroit Red Wings.
Okay.
I really don't trust their decor. And I am also a firm believer of players that hold out on the contract / miss portions of training camp. Like, they don't have good starts to this season often. We see this in all sports. Like, it's mostly the conditioning, and it takes them a while to get up to speed and caught up. And like, Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider are two players that fall under that category. And I don't really like what's going on here in Detroit. I think a lot of people are just, I don't want to say brainwashed by the Yzer plan, but just like slap that name on it. Everyone trusts it, but I really don't like where this is going. And the only player that I absolutely love on this team is Dylan Larkin, because I know like he's been training like an absolute nut job at the USNDP with Zach Werenski, Matt Boldy, Jack Hughes. These guys are putting in crazy work. But when you have two of your top 5 players holding out for contracts and missing out some time on conditioning while staying in another country and practicing with European teams, like, I don't know. I don't really think that's a good sign. And I think they're going to perform a lot worse than many people believe. And that's why I have them here.
Okay, we're getting close to the 1 hour here. I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I actually got to do something here later. So we'll kind of do our last 3, I guess, because we got 14, 15, and 16. So I'm going to do this quickly, and then I'll give you my picks, and you can give your picks. We can kind of discuss this after. So I've got Montreal next. I think getting Patrick Laine will help. They haven't had like another sort of driving force on the offense for a couple seasons now, because they've sort of been in a rebuild. Kent Hughes, I've liked some of the moves they've made. I still think they're still a rebuilding team. They're a team that still going to be finding their identity. Nick Suzuki hasn't been captain that long, so sort of figuring that out. So I have them number 14. And then what's the other team I have? There's a team I'm missing here. I know Philly I didn't mention. I have Philly last, so I'm trying to figure out which team's
CBJ.
15. CBJ, sorry. You know what? I'm going to take that back. I'm going to put CBJ at 14. The thing I look at is they, again, Gaudreau, rest in peace, Laine, they haven't really that's a big chunk of the offense that's out. Now, I will say, they could go higher. Like, I don't mind your pick at all where they are, because again, they have structure. It's more of, other than Gaudreau, they've had a pretty decent, outlook. They have Evanston running camp. They have more structure. I like the Van Riemsdyk pickup, a veteran guy who's been in the league for a while. I will have Columbus at 14. I have Montreal at 15, and I have the Flyers at last. Flyers haven't done anything, nothing in the offseason. And they're another team that is close to the cap. I love Torts. I would love to see the Flyers do better, but they're just like the same team they've always been. They're a little bit physical, but they got some aging players. This whole Brian Johansson thing it seems like a bit of a disaster. I guess they will get some cap space there, but I got the Flyers ending up last. So just to repeat that, I got Columbus at 14, Montreal 15. So Montreal will be the exact same spot as last year. And I've got the Flyers at dead last. Which way are you going on this?
So 14, I've got the Senators. 15, I've got the Flyers, and dead last, I've got the Montreal Canadiens.
Okay.
And the Montreal Canadiens, I think these guys on social media are getting a little bit too excited about these young guys. I know this is a Columbus fan. It takes 3 to 4 years. You can't get too excited for these guys to have an instant impact unless they're a generational talent like Connor Bedard or Sidney Crosby or Ovechkin. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then this is the other key component that I don't think anyone's talking about. And there's a permutation that this happens and it works, and I'm completely wrong, but I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be right. Cole Caulfield and Patrick Laine both like playing on the same spot on the power play and the left faceoff.
Great point. Yeah, I was thinking that too, actually. Yeah.
So are they going to split the power play units, or are they going to make Cole Caulfield play the bumper or Patrick Laine play the bumper, where I know Patrick Laine hasn't played the bumper for CBJ well when they tried him there. Cole Caulfield had some reps there at the IIHF tournament for Team USA where he looked decent, but yet again, they're playing teams like Kazakhstan and scoring 13 goals. So you can't read into it too much, you know? But yeah, I think that's a huge component of this team success that people are overlooking. They're like, oh, Patrick Laine, the name, the second line winger, this is great. It's like, okay, maybe at even strength, that's fantastic. But what's going to happen on the power play? I think things could get really messed up there. And I like Patrick Laine, and I hope he does well. But I just think that was like a problem that CBJ had when we had him, because Johnny Gaudreau, although he was a left-handed shot, he liked being the playmaker from the left wing on the power play. And Patrick Laine was the right-handed shot that wanted to be on the left wing on the power play. So that's why it didn't work, and they were never on the same page because they both were left wingers. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
I feel like that's going to be a huge problem with Montreal. And then Philly and Ottawa, I think the common theme between these two teams is the defensive core is just not trustworthy in the slightest. And I don't think a John Tortorella team's capable of finishing last. And I truly believe Ottawa might be due for some big players leaving if they don't get it together this year. I think that we could possibly see them trading a Shabbat type player. I could see them trading a Brady Tkachuk type player for multiple first round picks and prospects, because any team with assets would trade. This is crazy because like we'll never know, because many players of this caliber don't hit the open market. But like, I'd be willing to say that Brady Tkachuk would probably yield the biggest like trade return in NHL history if he hit the open market, just because of the leadership qualities, the fighting, the old school type mentality, and also he's top 5 in the league in shots created. So this guy clearly can do it all, and I think any team would take him in a heartbeat.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing I'll kind of push back on is I think with the new ownership group and the fact that there seems to be more structure there, because that was one of my concerns too. Like I believe even I think it was it Brady? There was someone on the Sens, I can't remember. I think it might have been Brady Tkachuk or someone on the team had changed agents recently. And you know, when someone changes agents, it's like, hey, I want out or I want a different scenery or something. So I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Brady Tkachuk, but that was something that kind of rose my alarm. But I think with the new ownership, it's bought them a bit more time to, you know, make the right moves. And again, the Chychrun thing was not great, but maybe they were just worried about that being a distraction. He wasn't happy there, despite being an Ottawa guy, which is really weird. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see kind of how that unfolds. Troy, this was awesome, man. Really, really good insight. We'll definitely get you back on the show again. Some awesome stuff here. Anything you want to plug before you get out of here? Anything you got going on? And obviously, I'll see you tomorrow for our fantasy draft.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And hopefully next week we could schedule that fantasy hockey themed show about strategy and some ADP outperformers, because I've built up some nice notes and stuff on Microsoft Excel, and I'd love to share that with you guys after we draft tomorrow, so you don't beat me.
Okay. Yeah. We'll definitely do that again. And maybe we'll see if we'll do the same time slot as last week, because I know that works a little bit better. For myself, for Troy, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. And last thing I'll mention, training camp underway. We're already in NHL preseason. Keep an eye on Fanatics View. My guy Taylor's been doing a great job getting post-game content, pre-game content. That's going to be a regular thing here on the channel going forward. So just make sure you guys are tuned into that. I will be back next Wednesday. We'll get Troy back on here as well too. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Appreciate you tuning in, and I'll talk to you guys soon.